This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 392, entitled The Happy Mix, 4-3ing and MGTOW monking. This is part 2 of 3 parts, continuing straight on. The Masculists label such women fluffy feminists, that is, monoconscious, fluffy feminist hypocrites who expect equal rights with men but reject equal obligations with men, that is, reject the Masculist push that, quote, now that women can work, that is, with their half-century of career window, even if they have had their 2 kids, women must work. Otherwise, they are seen by the Masculists as fluffy feminist hypocrites, a category of females that the Masculists hate even more strongly than the fluffies. It's bad enough that fluffy feminists are fluffies, that is, man-slaving parasites off the money and labour of a man. But they are hypocrites as well, wanting equal rights with men but rejecting equal obligations with men, in not bothering to get a career competent education with men, so that they can be FIPs, that's financially independent persons, as adults, pulling their own financial weight and not parasiting off the labour and money of a man. Monoconscious feminists then took over the divorce courts and created a massive gender injustice against men, causing one father in 4 to be financially massacred and have his life destroyed by fluffy feminist divorce lawyers and judges who saw men in their fluffy feminist mentality, their monoconsciousness, their ignorance of masculinist ideas and values as cash machines to be abused and robbed, to be revenged against by feminists for the ways that men oppress women, as taught to them by feminist ideology. These fluffy feminists then created divorce laws that ripped a man's kids away from him with a 1 in 4 chance. Half of marriages end in divorce, and in roughly half of those divorces, the ex-wife turns into a vindictive feminazi bitch, out to extract as much money from her ex-husband as the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts can manage, causing a real hatred amongst men, who then flocked into the MGTOW and masculist movements, thus creating the manosphere on the internet and a growing masculist consciousness amongst the young, who are now rapidly teaching themselves that traditional marriage really sucks for men. Young men in many Western countries now argue that if they face a 1 in 4 chance of losing their kids in a hated, fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court system, then why have kids at all? This kind of young male thinking has now resulted in 2/3 of young men under 35 in many countries to have rejected marriage and paternity due to its toxicity in the divorce courts, controlled by the hated fluffy feminists who make up most of the divorce court lawyers and judges. Thus the masculists see these monoconscious fluffy feminists as indirect genociders who are indirectly wiping out whole populations, since they have made divorce so toxic for men that young men have wiped their hands of marriage and paternity, so that the masculists are now reasoning that these feminazi genociders have to be stopped, since responsible males, masculist soldiers, would not tolerate that these hated monoconscious feminazis indirectly wipe out whole populations, which is what they are currently doing. So the politically minded masculists are talking increasingly about a sex war, in which male tolerance of what is happening to them in the divorce courts snaps, so that collective rage and hatred spreads through the male population in the advanced countries, causing men to pick up arms and go on a sex war, assassinating the hated gender politicians who created the deeply misandrous gender laws in the first place, to murder thousands of monoconscious feminazi divorce court lawyers and judges, and if the sex war really heats up, to go out into the streets and simply shoot millions of fluffy feminists. This drastic solution is the last resort, however, There are more benign solutions to the problem of men being massacred in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, and that is to destroy feminazi mono-consciousness by preaching to women that they must become bi-conscious, that is, to learn that gender oppression is a two-way street, that is, women oppress men too, and in fact worse than vice versa. For example, with women's financial parasitism, women's manslavery, the fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, women's many gender crimes against men that are continuous and last decades, for example, paternity fraud, where in about 5% of pregnancies the husband is not the father, or pill lying, where the girlfriend/wife lies to the boyfriend/husband that she's taking the pill, but in reality wants to get pregnant, then forces him to pay for decades for a kid he doesn't want, manslaving him for decades. The masculists are pushing hard for the para, that's paternity rejection right, which would give men the same right to reject an unwanted pregnancy as women have with their mara, maternity rejection right. The fluffy feminist hypocrites show their true two-faced attitudes towards men in opposing bitterly the masculist push for the para. Fluffy feminists want their cake and to eat it too. The legislation of the para will force women to grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives, and not depend on a man to solve white knight style their existential financial problems. Women's bitter opposition to the para shows clearly women's true attitude towards men, that is, seeing men as cash machines, to be sexploited, to be coldly, quickly, disloyally dumped in favour of a more sex-exploitable male if her current male loses his ability to pay for her to have babies. Men are now reacting in two essential ways to the hypocrisy of the monoconscious fluffy feminists. One is to take the MGTOW route, that is, to become a MGTOW, men going their own way, who are men who reject marriage and paternity, who are utterly unwilling to take the risk of 1 chance in 4 of being financially massacred and having his life destroyed by the hated, monoconscious, fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, if he is ignorant enough and stupid enough, in brackets, of MGTOW and masculist ideas, to become a married father. The level of rejection of traditional marriage and paternity is such that now in many Western countries, plus Japan, Korea, etc., 2/3 of young men under 35 refuse to marry, refuse to be fathers, and choose to live the MGTOW lifestyle. Amongst the MGTOW, there are those who date women, who still want to sex women, but utterly refuse to marry them, and certainly refuse to give them their sperm, due to the hated toxicity of the divorce courts, caused by the monoconscious fluffy feminists with their ignorance of masculist ideas and attitudes. If the financial massacring and destruction of the lives of divorcing fathers continues, then within a decade probably, over 90% of young men will be living the MGTOW lifestyle, thus directly wiping out whole populations within a single generation. So the gender politicians and politicians in general really need to take note of the teachings of the MGTOWs and the masculists. Otherwise, we will wipe ourselves out. This threat of human annihilation is one of the biggest problems of our 21st century. The MGTOWs can be split into 2 major groups, that is, 1, those who choose to date, sex and have relationships with women, but refuse to marry them and give them their sperm, and 2, those who are so fed up with female sexploitative psychology, female obesity, in brackets, 40% of Western women are obese and 30% are fat, so that 2/3 of women are now so sexually repulsive that they have become unfuckable, hence are much easier to reject totally by men, who don't even date them, who just ignore such unfuckable women totally, close brackets. That they live like monks, that is, they live celibate lifestyles. Such MGTOWs are called MGTOW monks. To live the life of a MGTOW monk is obviously to deprive oneself of sex with a woman, to deprive oneself of the nutritive nature of a woman if she chooses to behave that way with a man, the way mothers do to their small children. So one wonders, is it possible for men to benefit from the positive features of a relationship with a woman and not suffer the negative features? For example, running the risk of 1 chance in 4 of being financially crucified in the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court system by having a full-time relationship with a woman and having kids with her? This flyer presents my own personal solution to the above question. I call it the 4-3ing MGTOW monking lifestyle. By 4-3ing, I mean that as a male, one sees one's girlfriend for 4 days and nights a week. Thus one benefits from a woman's nurturing, her sexuality, and one experiences the joy of regular orgasms, in which the male brain is flooded with pleasure hormones as the man ejaculates inside his woman, making him feel joyous. For the other 3 days/nights a week, the male lives the lifestyle of the MGTOW monk. That is, he does not see his girlfriend during that time. In brackets, although in practice, in my own case, my girlfriend and I do swap emails each evening when we do not see each other, so as to have some daily social contact. Close brackets. This is the end of part 2.